Hey, deserving listeners, Love is Blind. Let's watch.
I had plans for weeks to go somewhere that all my friends from out of town were going to be at. Mm-hmm. And you're upset that I went.
I was not upset that you went.
You were kind of upset that I went.
That's not true.
You said, is this how every weekend's going to be? And
I said, I was wondering, I'm like, is every weekend going to be we do separate things and we don't
because I did
do
one
things
night
together?
Something separate.
So it's so frequent, and you've heard me say this before, that couples will fight over, you said this, no, I said that, no, I said this. And what I'll tell people in my office is neither one of you remember what really happened. So neither one of you can dispute what happened. We all see things through our emotional lenses. How about you just approach the situation as if what your partner thinks you said, you actually said. So, like, for him, he could say, well, if I came across like I was upset that you left, and I believe you that I must have come across that way. I don't remember saying what you think I said, but my memory isn't perfect and no one's is. But if I said that, I apologize because that's not really how I feel. I want to be clear that it's totally fine that you do things on your own. When I was asking that question, what I meant to say was that I was just curious because I wanted to know if I should start making plans on the weekend as well, or if I could make plans with my friends. I didn't really know, this is all new to me. So I'm sorry that it came across like I was upset, because that's not really how I feel. He could say something like that, even though in his heart he's like, I know I wasn't upset. I know I did, because one, why get bogged down in the details? And two, you probably don't remember accurately what happened. So it sounds like what happened was they had a conversation. She was going to go away with her friends, and it was during this, reality TV time span. And he asked, is every weekend going to be like this, or something along those lines? The other thing is that it's possible that he was hurt and he was upset, but he wasn't very aware of his upsetness, or he's ashamed of it and is rewriting history, or he's ashamed of it now that they're on camera, he's rewriting history. We don't know. We could also imagine that Danielle could read into things and interpret tone where there is none, or exacerbate or exaggerate tone that might be slightly there. So we don't know what happened, but they're having a conversation about it now.
It's like going for a few hours with my sister on a birthday weekend to a friend's house.
And who had a problem with it? I didn't.
It seemed like you did.
It seemed.
You acted concerned after the fact.
I just said, I'm thinking about this. It's important to me that
That's
we
not
have
what you
time.
said.
It's literally all I've said.
So if we go off of previous situations, so really a lot of what they talk about and fight about goes on outside of the camera, off camera. The last big fight, it's hard to, remember the sequence of fights because they've been in a lot. But the first fight was when he went to the party that I'm pretty sure the producers were at least very suggestive that he go, if not literally just said, you have to go. And because when it was all the cast, they were all meeting in Mexico. And she was violently sick and had to stay in the room. And he was socializing with all the cast members. And she looked down at the party, which is fine, and saw him talking with a woman. I think that triggered her. And then she said, according to her, that she was crying in the closet for 3 hours. And, she didn't have any specifics to say, like, I saw you kissing someone, or I saw you heavily flirting. She said, I just saw you talking to someone. Then I saw you walk away from the place, maybe just continuing to talk to someone. Anyway, so that was off camera. We don't know what she saw. Maybe it was something that is incredibly damning. We don't know. Then the other fight, there's been others, but the other big one that I can remember was when they go to her family's house, and she, he's being a good guy and getting along with her loose boundaried family, and they are leaving the place. This is happening off camera, and he starts to talk about, it's unclear to me whether or not he started indicating that he was on his phone with his family and friends at the party or as they were leaving. It sounded like as they were leaving that he indicated that he was on the phone during the party, and he's, so she's coming out of the party just like high on life that things went well between her fiance and her family. I think she's also probably a little insecure, like, okay, he met my family. Does he still love me? Because that seems to be a frequent question that crosses her mind, which is fine. So she's a little unsure. And then as they get in the car, he launches into a whole discussion about his friends and family and some sort of, sounds like a concerning thing that's happening in his life. And on the way home, he's just like, oh, and this happened. And he's looking for support and he's venting. And she interpreted it as, according to her, he ruined the day. He ruined the whole thing because I don't know what. I didn't really understand her argument. I could see the distortion potentially. But that happened off camera. Maybe he was a complete jerk face and we don't know. So we're hearing about another instance, and let's see how they navigate this.
Literally all I've said. Like, if every weekend was like you going out with your friends and me doing my thing, we never had time.
That's never been the case. Not even remotely the case. So why are you assuming that?
When you know someone in real life for 2 weeks, you don't have a lot of time that you can assess. Literally, we were at...
Okay, so it's hard for me to understand what's happening. I don't know if he did indicate something and she did pick up on it and she's exaggerating it or not exaggerating it, or if he literally had no tone or no indication that he was upset about it and he's just trying to explain its situation. So it sounds like he's about to explain it.
Dinner, and we were talking about things that we were thinking about, like, are we gonna say yes? I started thinking, like, you like to go out a lot. Like, when am I invited? Like, when are we doing that together? Versus, when do we make time for just us? Why does that have to become me saying that she's not allowed to hang out with her friends, which never came out of my mouth?
Okay, that's interesting. That's interesting. So let's rewind that and hear that again, because I think hearing about what's happening off camera might help us. So it sounds like what he's saying is, we were talking, and it's interesting to hear them disclose this because it makes sense that they would, that we were talking away from the cameras about whether or not we would say yes during the wedding. Because I think the way the whole show is operating under is like, they try to get everyone to actually show up to the wedding ceremony. Because I have a feeling like if some people were allowed by the show to bag out of the wedding, they would. They would say, like, at least the morning of, they would say, yeah, because do we really think that the people in last season who said no were completely ambivalent or yeses, and then at the last minute they said no? Or do we believe that they knew within, at least a span of time that they're going to say no? So anyway, they were talking about, are we going to say yes? And then he's saying that he was wondering, look, is it going to be like this every weekend that you're going to go out? And when are you going to invite me? And so I think that does express some insecurity of his from his part. There's nothing wrong with asking that, right? He's, I think, from his description, passively expressing some hurt and maybe some concern about her. He seems to like things to be orderly, and she seems to like things to be chaotic. They both kind of talked about that in terms of their homes and their lifestyles. I didn't show this clip, but she was saying, when we move in together, I'm going to have dance parties and get in, at this place, maybe get intoxicated, and people are going to dance on the tables because that's kind of parties that I throw. And we're going to dress up in hot dog outfits and corn outfits, and we're going to play rock band, and it's going to be all night long. And, that's my lifestyle. So, deal with it, which is fine. And he's like, and he didn't seem like, well, we'll cross it. He seemed like not happy about that. So I think that might be kind of eating away at him a little bit of just like, wait, so, and he kind of mentioned, it's like, we've only known each other for so long. We're pretty different people. How are our lives going to mesh? Because I don't ever do that kind of stuff. And if she's going to do that, am I invited? Do I want to be invited? Are we sort of incompatible in that way? Let's rewind that.
And I said, well, today I started thinking, like, you like to go out a lot. Like, when am I invited? Like, when are we doing that together? Versus, when do we make time for just us? Why does that have to become me saying that she's not allowed to hang out with her friends, which never came out of my mouth?
Yeah, I don't doubt that he never said that, and certainly didn't mean to say or imply that he didn't want her to ever hang out with her friends. Although you wonder if there's at least some unconscious desire there from him. But anyway, so yeah, but it's interesting that he framed it in the sense of, we were talking about whether or not we would say yes, and then I brought up the friend thing. So that certainly does imply that it's a major concern for him.
I honestly, like, I don't even know what to say. Like, your view of what happens in a conversation, or
You back, like you're not, the things that you're saying now are not the same exact things that you're saying. Like,
what was I saying earlier that I haven't said now? When did I say, Danielle, I'm upset that you hung out with your friends and that's not okay?
So this is when people start bringing up the word gaslighting. And you pull 100 people from contemporary, non-clinical, well, sometimes clinical individuals, and you ask them what this is, they're like, oh, that's gaslighting. It's not gaslighting in the technical sense. If people want to use it as a slang word and they want to create I just wish they would have created a new word that didn't already exist in the clinical literature. As I always talk about, which I'm sure you're tired of, gaslighting is a thing. It is when there is someone who either consciously I've added the conscious versus unconscious versions because it doesn't usually include that, but it's within an abusive relationship, and the perpetrator is either consciously or unconsciously going on an ongoing campaign that lasts for months, years, that has the purpose of controlling the other person by getting into their minds, by getting the victim to not trust their version of reality, to not trust their judgment of reality. Because if you can get into the victim's mind, then you control almost everything about that person. Because if you can abuse the victim, and then the victim could cry about it and say, hey, you're abusing me, and then if you've already broken down the victim's ability to gauge reality, then you could say, I didn't abuse you, and you do a number of things, and the victim literally goes, well, yeah, maybe you're right, because I'm actually terrible at gauging reality. Even though you were hitting me yesterday, I have learned through experience that I am crazy and I can't gauge reality, even though that's not true. And that's gaslighting. And it takes years to deprogram someone, and I've done that, from having been gaslit. This is either lying, deceiving, in denial, or trickery, or misremembering, and arguing that, which happens almost all the time in relationships. Every fight, or 90% of fights, involve something along these lines. I didn't say that. You think I said that. I didn't say that. Well, you said this, or, well, you frequently think I say something that I didn't say. If we call that gaslighting, then we should just say, well, everyone is a gaslighter, because everyone has done that before. So then the word completely loses its meaning. It doesn't have any meaning anymore, and it demeans those who actually have been gaslit and have been identifying themselves as having been gaslit for decades. We've been using the word for decades in the clinical literature. So every time I hear it, it's like a spike in my back. I'm just like, because I have worked with people who have been gaslit. I've worked with victims who have been in those kinds of relationships, and we use the word gaslighting because that's the word that we use in clinical literature, and it means something. Imagine if some teenagers just started to use the phrase "I love you" to mean like, that's cool. They're just like, they look at you and they're just like, oh my God, I love you. And you're like, really? You're like, well, no, I mean, that's just what we say now about being cool. It's just like, well, don't say that. Say something else. Like you're messing with the language. And it's confusing, and it takes away from the meaning. That's a bad example. Or how about this? Black Lives Matter. Someone decides to use Black Lives Matter in that's kind of what it's like. Someone comes along, a different group of people who aren't black, like they play on a team and they have black uniforms, and they just start walking around town going, Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter, as this like pep rally for their soccer team or something. You would look at them and say like, stop. And they're like, what? that we came up with this word, this is what the word means to us. And it's like, okay, but did you consider the previous meaning? The previous meaning of gaslighting, it means something to people. It's an experience that they go through. It's a part of the abuse that they went through. And the label and the clinical literature and the meaning of the word provides them with some solace of acceptance and a frame of understanding the horrors that they went through. And if everyone just starts throwing around gaslighting, like when someone doesn't remember something correctly, or they're literally ashamed of themselves and they're just in denial about something, then it's just I feel like I'm just barking up a tree that no one hears me, honestly. And I mean, people hear me, but certainly the world isn't going to hear me. And I'm guessing in 10 years, like literally everyone's going to be using the word literally and the word gaslighting in ways that I'm just not used to. And old therapist shakes fist at cloud should shut up is what I'll do right now. But anyway, so what he is saying is, and so there's two things. One is that this fight is very common. 2, he could be wrong. 3, she could be wrong. 4, both of them could be wrong. We can say that there's been a pattern up until this point where Danielle has distorted things seemingly, like with the jealousy that she experienced when he was at the party. He was just at a party, and we all can believe that he was not flirting with anyone. He might have been, and she might have seen that, but it certainly didn't seem that way to us, particularly considering he was very much in love with Danielle at the time. And I believe him when he says, I just wanted to come back to you. I didn't even really want to be at that party, which I believe. I don't know if that's true. And, she's just looking over the railing, seeing him at a party, and she gets triggered. It's not her fault. These are relational traumas that I have treated. She goes into the closet and cries for 3 hours. That indicates that she will sometimes see something, some, triggers that are distortions or exaggerations of what's happening. So if that is true, which we don't know, and someone actually emailed me and told me that they heard from her in an interview, or who knows if it's true, that she is in therapy, which makes me so happy. I can't even tell you. I'm just like, whew, like I was, I mean, there are people that I get worried about, and I won't go into details, but the things that she exhibits are indicative of some issues that can result in some really tragic outcomes. And so I was legit worried about her, and I'm just really glad she has a therapist, and I just hope that it's going well for her, and I hope she sticks with it. And I trust that, and because she does exhibit some self-awareness, so I trust that she'll continue to go down the road of healing, which she deserves, which she can then get her needs met. Anyway, so we have seen her see things that aren't, necessarily there, or at least exaggerated. We don't know if it's true, but there's some indications of that. So is it possible that the conversation they're talking about is another example where she's doing that, and it's starting to bother him? This ongoing, if that's true, which you don't know, it's starting to bother him. Like, you keep doing this where you are sure that I did or said something which I did not do, and you then blame me and call me, a narcissist or an abusive person or whatever, and you just walk away like that's the facts, and those aren't facts. That's not what happened. Now, I suspect that there's some truth to what she's observing. So I'll tell you a story. I might have even talked about it before in this series, but I had a client. So I specialize in people with this kind of reactivity, these schemas and these relational traumas. And there's a minefield when you're working with these sorts of clients. Not always, but there often is, because as I interact with the client, they will misinterpret what I say. They will insert ideas into my head. Because of their relational traumas, it tells them that the closer they get to someone, the more likely that person is to abandon them. The more they depend on someone, the more they need someone, the more this person is going to abuse them, leave them, abandon them, criticize them, whatever. And so it just becomes an overwhelming assumption as they get close. And so as the client gets close to me, which is important for them to have a corrective experience so that I can show them that if they can trust me, because it's a controlled environment, and we can really teach them neurologically that they can trust other humans, and that they aren't necessarily inherently abandonable, and that other people aren't inherently abandoning, then they can relax a little bit and not be as reactive to their relationships in their real life, and then they can start to have corrective experiences in those venues. But it has to start with a therapist often, because it's a controlled environment and I understand how to manage these kinds of relationships, So as they're getting close to me, which is important for a corrective experience, their anxiety starts to go up and they start to get paranoid about me having ideas that I want to leave them, or I can't wait for the session to be over, or I'm judging them, or I'm going to close my practice. I mean, I've heard it all, and it's very, shall I say, it starts to sound the same. These individuals, when I treat them, they tend to say almost the exact same phrases. And and that's fine, because, it just indicates, and we've been studying this syndrome for 80 years in my field. It goes back to the Freudians. It was well observed a long time ago. We have different names for it throughout the decades, but anyway. So when I've treated people like this, one of the things that will happen is they will literally hear things that I did not say. And as a sort of generic scenario, I'll have a client who, say a couple, and the individual who has the indications that Danielle indicates will get upset at me in the middle of a session, and I'll feel it. I'll feel this sort of wall go up and a level of bad mood towards me. And the session will end, and I'll sit down afterwards and I'll think, what happened there? I feel like there was something going on with with one of the members of the couple. And then they cancel their appointment, their next appointment, over email or something. And then I say, okay, well, let me know when you want to reschedule. I don't hear back from them. And then I'm like, oh, something must have happened in that client's mind that triggered them, and now they feel like I don't like them, or they're really angry at me, so they want to blow out of therapy. This is very common for this syndrome. And then I'll reach out and I'll say, did something happen in the last session? I felt like there was a bit of a tense moment at the end of the session that I didn't really understand what was happening, and I'd love to talk about it. Could you please come back and let's talk about it if you want to? They come back. They're, the one client with the syndrome is reticent to do so, but the two of them, the couple comes back. And then the member with the syndrome tells me, once I draw it out of them, they say, well, in that last session that we had, you said to me that you thought I was a piece of crap and you didn't want me as your client anymore. And I will say, what did you think I said? Well, you said, I heard you when we were talking about that thing. You said, and we're not talking about someone with schizophrenia or someone with delusions or psychosis. We're talking about someone that doesn't have that. And they will say, you told me, I heard you. You said that I was a piece of crap and that you didn't want to work with me anymore. That's why I got upset, because of course I got upset, and that's why I didn't want to make another appointment with you. And one, I know in those moments I wouldn't say those things. Two, I don't even think those things about my clients. So that's absurd to think that I would think that about a client. I wouldn't even come close to thinking that. It's just not even possible, given the way that I am as a human and as a therapist. So, but the client is 100% convinced that I did say those things, because it felt like I said those things, because their traumas were being triggered in that moment. In the moment, things are being triggered as they're getting close to me, as their vulnerability is emerging, and it feels threatening. And their brain will invent something to explain why they feel that way, and then they will convince themselves that that thing actually happened when it never happened, but the feeling was accurate. They felt scared of me. They felt abandoned by me. They felt like I was going to hurt them. they felt like I didn't like them. That's the way it felt to them. And then they invented something to explain that. And then they convinced themselves that that thing really happened because it felt like it did, even though it never did. So I don't know if that's what's happening right now, but maybe we'll find out.
1 week, and us having these conversations still a week before the wedding is terrifying.
I don't know what else to say. And I'm telling you, you can't see your friends. Never said that once. I wouldn't ever be like that.
It's just hard for me to like trust what you say sometimes when you kind of dance around the issue and then feel a certain way after.
So that's possible that, because there's some indication, you know, the way he described what happened is that he was talking about whether or not he would say yes or no at the altar, and then he brought up her friends and, you know, what the policy is there. And so it's possible that she's accurate in this time, that it's hard for me to trust you because, so imagine you're her and you have the syndrome that I hypothesized that she might have. I'd have to ask her. And you know sometimes that you do distort things, but that doesn't mean that you're always distorting. So there are times when you feel like, no, this is not one of those times, but how do you know? You know, it's hard to determine that. And when you're terrified of being hurt, you're really hyper-focused on, if you're going to be hurt, you're hyper-focused on, you know, what's in his mind. And so, and, you know, they've been fighting a lot, so she would have more reasons to be worried that he is going to leave her, because I think that, you know, given what's been happening and given the way he talks, I think that is a question mark. I don't know. Maybe they'll both say yes at the altar. I don't know. Maybe they won't even make it there. But so, yeah. So if I were there as a therapist, I would tell him, like, okay, slow down. You know, okay, how are you feeling right now? I'm guessing he would say, well, I'm frustrated. Okay, tell me more. Well, I'm scared that she thinks bad things about me that aren't true. Okay, tell me about that fear. You know, we talk about that because that would help her to hear that. Instead of him just being defensive, it would help her to say, oh, he feels afraid that I have negative thoughts about him. Oh, that's why he's getting exasperated. Not that he's not getting that way because he doesn't like me. He's that way because he's afraid of me thinking bad thoughts of him. Okay, that's a different frame that I think he is feeling that she might benefit from and help her to feel more secure. Then I would say, okay, you know, regarding her friends, why don't you take some time to explain how you really feel? Regardless of how you felt in the past, regardless of what you said in the past, regardless of what's remembered about you know, how do you feel? You know, really, let's explore it. Because I'm guessing that there is a little bit of concern for him, but I wonder if he's either terrified to bring it up because he's worried she's going to, you know, expand on that, or two, he's not super aware of it, because there's a chance that, I don't know, but there have been some slight little indications that he might not exactly know how he feels all the time. But it's hard for me to know that.
I am being extremely realistic about whether or not this is going to work out, and we have 1 week to figure it out.
Yeah, love is strong, but it's only so strong. So John Gottman is here in Seattle, studied couples in the lab. He would bring them into these little houses and actually film them interacting, and throughout the day, 24/7. And then scientists would code the behaviors and the communication between everyone, just because it's one thing to observe people like having a conversation. It's another thing to watch people in the wild. That's like going into, you know, the African savannah and watching giraffes and coding their behavior. It's the same thing. You get a lot more accurate data that way. And so one of the things they found, and they did a number of different kinds of observations, not only that, but also just observing people have a conversation about something for a couple hours. But what they found was that on average, couples that have 5 positive to 1 negative tend to be satisfied with their relationship and tend to last. And the reason why it's a ratio instead of like a set number is that if you have 5,000 interactions in a week, or 6,000 interactions in a week, and 5,000 of them are positive and 1,000 of them are negative, then according to statistics, you have a higher likelihood of being satisfied and lasting as a relationship. The reason why that sounds strange is because if you heard about a couple that had 1,000 negative experiences in a week, you would say they're doomed. But if it's offset by a lot of positives, so the idea is that if you have a lot of interactions and a fair amount of conflicts, but you have a lot of positive interactions as well, then things tend to go well. On the flip side, if you have very little interactions, but you have extremely minimal negative interactions with each other, then you tend to, so if you have, 6 interactions in a week and 5 of them are positive and 1 of them are negative, then you tend to last. Now, the thing here is that what is an interaction? What does that mean? We can think of classic ones like I love you or kissing or having sex or something, but it can really be anything. It could be just watching TV together and having it go well, or both enjoying the dog together, or the example that you see in the observations of these couples that John Gottman in Seattle studied was the woman is looking out the window and the wife is looking out the window and she sees a bird and she's like, oh, it's a bird. And the husband's reading the paper or something, and then he pauses, and then he looks up at the bird and he's like, oh yeah, that's a positive interaction. Because, when you get into the mundanity of ongoing married life, that's most of your interactions are these little things like, my toast looks like the face of Jesus. Well, interesting. That's the pinnacle of married life there. Or, can you pass me the toothbrush or the toothpaste? And here you go. Oh, thanks. That's a positive interaction. So if you have enough of those, then you tend to do better. Anyway, so I wonder how their ratio is doing, is my point. All right, well, that does it for that episode. Everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.